Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is my November book haul, which of course includes Bookoutlet's Black Friday sale, which I was genuinely on a plane when it started, and I landed and I was on holiday in Mexico, and I was on my phone at the rooftop pool at this hotel going, I need to order my books. Let's look through the books. One of my wrap-ups from last month, I was talking about how I'd just seen the movie version of Testament of Youth and I wanted to reread it. And I was going to get it from the library, but then I saw it on sale for $1, so I bought that. There's the movie cover, which kind of makes it look like a romance and not a, pacifist memoir. But hey, whatever makes the sale, right? Next up, Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Beautiful Struggle, which is a memoir about his father. So I believe Between the World and Me is the one that everybody's talking about now, which I think is his book for his son. So that'll be interesting. This was one of the 2014 Man Booker shortlisted books, The Lives of Others, which is set in Calcutta in the 60s, I believe. Yep, 1967. The Blue Room. This is one of these books where I feel like you shouldn't read books in translation if you can read the original. Except that every time I see the French copy of this, it's like $16. And here it is in English, and it was $2, so I'm reading the translation. Artistic integrity is fine, but frugality wins out. And I got Hellblazer Shoot, which I believe is the end of Warren Ellis's run. I was actually picking these up in single issues when they came out, so I haven't bought any of the trades from this era of Hellblazer yet, but I thought I would because I think this includes that single issue that didn't get published at the time because it was about a school shooting and it happened to have been scheduled to be released a month after Columbine, I think. Maybe even less than a month, so they took it off. They skipped that, and I think that's what made Warren Ellis quit the title at the time because I feel like he was supposed to write this for longer. That's what this collects. It's one of the shorter of the Hellblazer collections, I think. Speaking of things that are in translation that were just cheaper, The Third Testament, Book 3, The Might of the Ox. And I love these big album-style ones. I wish American comics came out this way, because I would love to get this kind of, rather than this kind of floppy book, because these hold up so well. I'm not saying much because this is a giant box because it was such a good sale, and I don't want this video to take forever. This is Thomas King's The Back of the Turtle, which I believe is sort of a merging of, Christian and native mythology. That'll be an interesting read. I try not to read the summaries too much because I like to be more surprised, so apologies. This did win the Governor General's Award. And next up, The Genius of Dogs. How dogs are smarter than you think. I don't know how many books about dogs like this that anybody needs, because I do have The Intelligence of Dogs and Inside of a Dog, but look at the dog on the cover. So I had to buy it, being a dog person. Next up, Flew by Gina Kolata, who is a New York Times science reporter, and she also wrote Rethinking Thin and a book about cloning, I think. Anyway, this is about the influenza epidemic of 1918, which is sometimes mentioned as sort of a footnote to the First World War. So yeah, I think this will be an interesting read. One of my great-grandfathers died in that epidemic. Here we go. Jan Wong's Red China Blues. I was a huge fan of Jan Wong's Lunch with Jan Wong column in the Globe and Mail back in the, I guess it was late 90s, maybe early 2000s. I thought that was awesome. I know she and the Globe had a negative falling out. That was too bad. Anyway, that was a great column. I should have bought the collection of that. Anyway, this is, I believe, her memoirs of when, as a student, she went through that socialist phase that a lot of people do, but she was hardcore about it, so she moved to China and went to university there. Yeah, she was one of only 2 Westerners permitted to enroll at Beijing University. The famous story from this is that she informed on, I think, her roommate, which sounds kind of terrible, but in any case, I think this will be very interesting. Oh, here we go. In a series that I read out of order, here's Stephen Erikson's Deadhouse Gates, which is in a series and it's not the first, and I haven't read the first, but I'm going to read them out of order because somebody recommended this to me and it showed up on sale, so how could I resist that? And I always think with a lot of these long series, it's better to read them out of order, because then you can tell if you actually like the writing. Because I think with a lot of them, you read the first one, and if you get caught up in any element, whether it's a character or the plot, you end up reading it even if you don't enjoy it that much, because you want to find out how that character turns out or how that plot point turns out. And this way, you can tell more, I find. But maybe that's just me. And next I picked up The Accidental Asian by Lin-Liu, who I believe was one of Bill Clinton's speechwriters. Yes, he was. So this is a book of essays reflecting on life as a second-generation Chinese American. And next up, Treasure Island, which I read as a kid, and I don't remember if it was a abridged version or not, but I wanted to read this again because the final season of Black Sails is coming out next month, and I don't watch a huge amount of TV, but that is without a doubt probably my favorite TV series of the past 5 years. If you've only seen a couple of the first episodes of the first season, yes, they're trash, but it improves a lot as it goes on. The tie-in is that TV series is a prequel to Treasure Island, so it has some of the same characters, and it has some of the characters that are mentioned in this are in the show. And I felt like I should reread this, and I actually downloaded one of the free versions onto my phone, and the formatting was horrible. So when I saw this, I thought, well, I'm going to buy a hard copy because I might as well have one that's readable. And next up, On the Noodle Road, From Beijing to Rome with Love and Pasta by Lin-Liu. This is the story of pasta. It's basically a history of food with various stops on places that were on the historic Silk Road. So I think it starts in China and ends in Italy, and I believe there are bits in Iran and Turkey and a few other places. Let me take a look. Yeah, China, Central Asia, Iran, Turkey, Italy. So yeah, I think this sounds like fun, because who doesn't like noodles? And from history that I feel like I have not read enough to history that I've clearly read too much about, here we go. Catastrophe 1914, Europe Goes to War, which is another World War I nonfiction, which of course I bought because if you've watched more than a couple of videos on my channel, you know the First World War is one of my pet topics. I almost said I was a fan, and that's kind of creepy. So no, that's not right. I'm a buff. Even when you say war buff, that sounds kind of militaristic, doesn't it? And I don't mean it that way. I'm just interested in the history, not in a creepy way. And while we're on the topic of military histories, I also picked up 2 books by Robert M. Poole on Hallowed Ground, the story of Arlington National Cemetery, and Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery. I lived in the DC area for about 18 months, starting a couple of years ago, 2013. We moved there, and I lived in Roslyn, which is in Arlington, just above the cemetery. So I actually used to walk my dog through Arlington National Cemetery pretty much every day that we lived there, weather permitting. It's interesting the way people treat it and regard it. And I remember at one point, my cousin and my aunt were visiting from Belgium, and they commented on, and they happened to be there in the spring when a lot of the U.S. middle schools go and do a tour of D.C., and they were impressed. We were over by the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier when they were doing the changing of the guard, and they both commented on how these middle school kids behaved, and how it seemed almost like a religious experience in a way that you don't see in Western Europe, and you don't really see it in Canada either. And yeah, I was saying it's almost like a pilgrimage that they make. Yeah, it's a different kind of experience, and it was interesting to walk through there, as I said, every day, and to see tourists going through, but also the people who volunteered there, and the other people who just went through every day because they were in the neighborhood. It was it's just really interesting, and I wanted to read more about it. So when I saw both of these, I definitely picked them up. I miss living in the DC area. There's so much going on, and yeah. So, the next 3 books that I picked up are 3 of Malinoon's Emmanuel Cooper mysteries, which are about a cop in South Africa in, I believe, the 50s or 60s. I haven't read these yet. They are, yeah, in the 50s. But I always enjoy a good historical mystery, as does my mother, and since I'm staying with her, I always like to get her a few books, so I'm going to keep these here and maybe not read them this time because I'm planning to finally get back home at the end of the month. But, you know, have them around so I can read them later, and she'll probably enjoy them. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting setting, so I'm looking forward to reading them. The author has said that one of the character is based on, or loosely based on, one of her uncles who was a police officer in South Africa in the 50s. I think she have another 3 books in a series. These are Linda Nagata's, and this is The Red, The Trials, and Going Dark. And they are military sci-fi, which I've seen fairly well reviewed. I think the series itself is called Red. And yeah, I don't know a huge amount of them because, as I said, I like to go into this kind of thing blind. But next up, If We Should Never Meet by Amy Fenn, which is a series of short stories that are inspired by Operation Baby Lift, the evacuation of thousands of orphans from Vietnam to America weeks before the fall of Saigon. So, yeah, I imagine this will be interesting. We have here, okay, next up, Will Ferguson's Road Trip Rwanda. So what I believe this is about is Will Ferguson goes to Rwanda 20 years after the genocide, drives around, talks to people, looks at gorillas. Subheading is A Journey into the New Heart of Africa, which, that's one of the subheadings where, like, how do you name any country as the heart of a continent? I don't know, that strikes me as fishy, but I'm still curious to read the book. Oh, this is a book that's gotten some booktube buzz, Boy Snowbird, which is a retelling of Snow White, I believe. I was actually on the fence about this, but curiosity got the better of me. Next up, The Greattamasha, Cricket, Corruption, and the Spectacular Rise of Modern India. Because, again, if you've watched more than a couple of videos on my channel, in addition to the First World War, my other pet topic is the sort of socio-political role of sports in society. So, yeah, this is another one that I'm thinking should be interesting. And what else we have? Parallel Journeys. This is a kids, or middle grade, I guess, says ages 10 and up, nonfiction, and I'm always interested in the way history gets written for younger audiences. And this one is the parallel biographies of 2 kids in 1930s Germany, one of whom was Jewish, one of whom was in the Hitler Youth, and, you know, what happens to them as they get older. Yeah, I imagine that will be depressing. But since it's aimed at ages 10 and up, I don't know how depressing it can get. So, yeah, that's interesting balance. We'll see. Alright, and now we jump back to fiction, The Lotus and the Storm by Lan Cao, which is about Vietnamese Americans in Virginia in the 90s? No, actually, I think in the 2000s. And this is one of these things that I love when you see something about the authors and it says that this author in particular is a renowned expert in international law, trade, and economic development. I love that. I love it when you see authors who their background is not in literature. It's in, you know, something completely different like that. I don't know. I just enjoy seeing that kind of thing. I didn't even remember that I bought this, but The Core of the Yoga Sutras. I don't know, it's apparently about the philosophical core of yoga. I don't know, that could be interesting. I'm not a huge yoga person, but I guess I was curious. I don't even remember putting that in my cart. But hey, it's apparently the definitive guide to the philosophy of yoga, so there we go. Okay, next. Shooting Kabul, which I believe is a kid's book about some Afghan Americans. And again, it's one of these things that used to be dealing with a fairly serious topic, And I really enjoy seeing how that gets written for the younger age groups. So, yeah. Cheers. And finally, This Divided Island, which is Life, Death, and the Sri Lankan War. So, yeah, I mean, this is one of those topics that used to be in the newspaper every day, and I've never read a comprehensive history about it, so I was interested to pick this up and find out, as I said, something that's longer than articles. Because I've read a lot of fiction that is set in Sri Lanka or among overseas Sri Lankan communities, but never any nonfiction. So I'm very interested in reading that. And that is an embarrassingly large haul, but in my defense, it was a great sale. So, yeah, did you overshop that sale? I know a lot of people did because I've seen the videos coming out already. But yeah, if you did, make me feel better about it. Talk about it in the comments. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.